Right. Well, appreciate being asked to give this talk today by this conference. I've been here before, but it's always a good conference to come to. A lot of different crops being dealt with here. A lot of people to talk with. I'm particularly interested in this subject. I've worked in nutrition now for a long number of years, longer than I probably like to think about. I grew up in Central Florida, around citrus growing families, and I've been working professionally in citrus for about 40 years now. So uh, this is a subject that I like very much, although the last 15 years has been very challenging. As all of you know, we have HLB, Hung Long Bing in Florida, and as I understand it, it's made its way into Georgia and Alabama a little bit. But you guys, fortunately, the satsumas that you're growing in South Georgia are not as sensitive to HLB as some of the orange varieties in Florida. But it's pretty well devastated that industry. We're keeping it together. It's still, still functioning, still sustainable. But nutrition and irrigation, which I won't talk a lot about irrigation, but the nutrition side has gone a long ways to keep us in business in Florida. And so that's something that I'm very proud of and something that we'll be talking about. We have two sources of nutrient information for citrus available in Florida, but they're certainly applicable in other areas, particularly Georgia and Alabama. That's the one on your left side, nutrition of Florida citrus trees. We're now into the third edition of that publication. We revise it about every 10 years. It goes into large detail on different nutrient matters. And the previous edition was in 2008, just after Hung Long Bing HLB came into Florida in 2005. So we had very little information at that time. So almost nothing in the 2008 uh, version talks about HLB. So in the 2020 version, the third edition, we kept most of the other material because it is still relevant for healthy trees. It is still mostly relevant for even HLB affected trees, but we in each chapter dealing with different segments of the production of citrus, we have at the very beginning a blue highlighted box that contains the latest information that we've been able to get on HLB affected trees and what nutrient practices will benefit those trees. And then the other guide there, the orange one, Florida Citrus Production Guide. That's a relatively new product for University of Florida. We had a production guide many years ago. We went towards the the system of having separate publications on different aspects of citrus production. Now we've gone back to a production guide. This is a third or fourth um, edition of it, and we renew those yearly. And the reason we're maintaining these two publications is that the nutrition of Florida citrus trees goes into a lot of detail. So if you need the detail, it's there. If you want more of a production guide, what fertilizers to use, what pesticides, what herbicides to use, that's in the production guide, and that's renewed every year. And so for our best management practices in Florida, uh, we are using the Florida Citrus Production Guide for that because we can renew that every year. We add new information each year. And the information I'm going to go through are in both publications. They're in the new information for the nutrition of citrus trees, and they're in the production guide. So the first chapter is merely an introduction, and I've talked about some of those things. But you see the blue box, and that's what it'll look like in that publication. We have, uh, as I mentioned, the 2000 aid information is still there, and it's still relevant, particularly for healthy trees, but quite often for HLB affected trees as well. The nutrient information as far as the macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, those have remained the same. As far as our recommendations, they haven't changed yet, although we are gathering data, we're conducting studies that will bring some changes here in the next couple of years relative to HLB affected trees. And then at the bottom one there, we talk about different aspects: irrigation scheduling, nutrient rates, soil pH, which is a huge factor with HLB affected trees, and I'll go into that. And then the use of citrus under protective screens or cups. I won't go into a lot of detail on that one. That'll be the final slide I have. But that's something that we're looking at very strongly as a production practice to avoid psyllids coming in contact with the trees to spread the disease. So the second chapter of that publication, Guide to Florida Citrus Trees, Citrus Tree Nutrition, talks about soils and soil preparation, soil pH, and there we did an extensive study, about a three or 4 year study that followed a 2 years of grove surveys, and I'll show you a little bit of those results here in a moment, to determine exactly what effect soil pH has on HLB affected trees. Because we were seeing, and growers were telling us that if the pH gets too high, they were seeing very drastic effects of HLB. But if they could maintain lower pH, then those effects were less. So we looked into that, and what we found is that if you get into higher pH of 6.5 to 7 or higher, which is quite common in some of our citrus groves, because we're irrigating with water from the limestone aquifer. So we have a lot of bicarbonates in the water. We have high pH water going out. It's affecting the soil. We've had our soil pH in our groves go from a natural state of about 5.5 to 6.5 up to in excess of 7 because of irrigation water. And what we found in that study was that calcium, magnesium, iron, zinc, and manganese were particularly altered. The ability of the tree to take up those nutrients by high pH. And if you can maintain the pH between 6 and 6.5, that effect went away, and we saw very good results from trees with HLB. So this is a part of the grove survey that we did, and on the x-axis is the average yearly soil pH for the grove, and on the y-axis is yield in boxes per tree. And you can see that from left to right, that line goes down. So as the pH increases, production decreased in the groves that we surveyed. And we looked at a lot of different soils, different areas of the state. This is just a sampling of that information. So what we looked at in our study that we did on a couple different groves is that we had different soil pHs. We acidified the water, basically irrigation water, and we adjusted the pH into different ranges of pH. And we found that the pH of the soil, which is on the y-axis, affected the leaf area index, the number of leaves, the surface area of leaves on a tree. So as you increase the soil pH, you get more leaves on the trees, more dense foliage. But you can see it also tails off. That as you go above 6.5 to 7, it'll tail off as well. Then we did that for two different years, two different areas. So the spring and the summer of 2021, this is the data you see here. So it's the most recent data we have. And that is showing that effect very nicely, that the trees respond to moderating soil pH. The second chapter is, again, soil preparation, and there we're looking at organic matter. We've had a lot of people, and we've promoted this for a number of years to add organic matter to the soil. In Florida, and then the same is true in South Georgia, I'm sure, we have very low organic matters. In most cases, it's 0.5% or less. And so if we can increase the organic matter at the time that the trees are planted, that organic matter will hang around for a number of years. If we put compost on the soil surface of mature trees, the trees will benefit from the nutrients that are in that organic matter as it decomposes, but the organic matter itself goes away. It oxidizes away, and it really doesn't contribute to additional organic matter in the soil. So you really have to do this at planting, and you see the list there of benefits of adding organic matter. It improves the soil structure. You have higher water and nutrient retention, additional nutrient sources as those organic components decompose. You have decreased soil erosion, and even in some cases insulation from heat and cold. That's particularly if you apply it to the soil surface. Buffers soil pH, and it provides for aeration of the soil. The next chapter in the publication deals with soil and leaf testing and sampling. We have for decades recommended one leaf sample a year, taken typically during the summer program, and I'll show you a graph in just a moment why that's happened, or why we chose that time. So typically between July and August, September, that's the recommended time that we suggest taking leaf samples and soil samples. But a lot of growers have started taking leaf samples, particularly at different times of the year, because they want to know what they need to add to their trees right now to benefit those trees that are affected by HLB. So you see in the table there, we have soil testing and leaf testing, and you can see the factors there that we recommend that you look at using those two different samples. This is the typical response of citrus leaves, and we suggest that you take a sample of 6-month-old leaves whenever you take the sample, whether it's in the spring, summer, or fall. You take 6-month-old leaves because those leaves are now stable. They've taken up the nutrients that they need. You're not influenced by the maturity of the leaves, but you can see that the x-axis are months and years, starting from April going to the next March, and then the concentration is on the y-axis. It changes through the years, and through the year, the production year, and so you have to be aware of that. The gray boxes are that time period that I mentioned from July to September. And that's when the nutrients are most stable in the leaves. Take nitrogen, for example, tends to start high in the spring, primarily because of our fertilizer practices, but also the physiology of the tree. It goes into a stable period during the summer and then tails off in the fall and early spring of the next year. Same thing for phosphorus and potassium. Calcium is opposite. It starts low and goes high. So you have to be aware of that if you're taking leaf samples at other times of the year than that summer period. This is a table that appears in both publications, and that's our what we consider optimum leaf nutrient concentrations, and I'll talk about that in a moment, that these numbers may change in the near future. What we have found is that HLB typically has very low leaf nutrient concentrations, particularly of micronutrients. And being at that optimum to high range is where you want to be, rather than in the middle of the optimum range. So this is something that we've been altering or been checking over the last 10 or 15 years. And we are in the process of changing our recommendations so that this table will adjust up a little bit, so that the optimum concentrations will now be in the high 2%, say for nitrogen, high 2 to low 3, or at 3. So this is a good resource for that type of information. Hopefully you can see that, but it is really to give an example of the effect of soil extractant on your nutrient program. Our current, that is IFAS with the University of Florida, our current recommendations are based on Mehlich 3 soil extraction. And that's the second extractant you see there. And we have for phosphorus, manganese, and calcium, we have the different ranges of soil interpretation up in the upper right corner there, from very low to very high. So if you use a Mehlich 3, you have different numbers in the high range, which is where you want to be. I mean, to avoid applying excess fertilizer, you want to be in that high range. Then, but if you use Mehlich 1, it's a different number. If you use ammonium nitrate, that's a different number completely, and you have Olsen and Bray and others that are there. So you have to understand know the extractant that your soil test lab is using in order to interpret the values correctly. And this table can get you there. So to get into really the meat of what I want to talk about today comes in chapter 6, and that's fertilizer sources for formulations, particularly controlled release and liquid fertilizers. That's what we find is most beneficial to HLB affected trees. You want to provide a constant supply of nutrients. The old system in citrus was to apply 2 or 3 soluble fertilizer applications a year. The trees were very efficient in picking up those nutrients, even though application may be 3 or 4 months apart. They were very efficient in picking up the nutrients and storing those nutrients within the tree for later use. HLB, that's not the case at all. What we found out early on was that the first negative effect of HLB is a reduction in root concentration, root amount. So it just does, applying 2 or 3 nutrients 2 or 3 times a year just doesn't provide enough nutrients for that reduced root system to take up. So you have to apply nutrients on a kind of a constant feed situation. And that is really done most effectively by controlled release fertilizer. If you're applying fertilizer only 2 or 3 times a year, you want to use a controlled release fertilizer, particularly for younger trees. But if you have a fertilizer injection system for your irrigation, then you want to apply small amounts of fertilizer every couple weeks, particularly during the period of March to September or October. That's the critical time. So whatever you can do to provide that amount of nutrients, not necessarily more nutrients, but the same amount of nutrients over a longer period of time, that's what you need to do with HLB affected trees, and even varieties such as Satsuma that may not be greatly affected by HLB, they benefit equally. So we did several studies looking at the nutrients themselves. One was a 5-year study, and then we're just concluding a series of three-year study, and I'll provide the information there. But we looked at initially we looked at micronutrients applied foliarly, because that's the way we've always applied our micronutrients in citrus particularly. And so we looked at how much do you have to apply to get the leaf concentrations back into that high optimum, low high range that I mentioned earlier. So that's what this study was really to look at. We applied 0 micronutrients. We applied 1 time the current IFAS recommendations, 1.5, and 2 times, 3 times a year. So that resulted in 3, 4.5, and 6 times the IFAS recommendation of micronutrients on an annual basis to see what benefits we got from those micronutrients. So this is the study that we did. As I mentioned, is a 5-year study in a commercial grove, Valencia and Swingle, 16 by 30 foot spacing. We had a no spray control, but we also had, as I mentioned, the half X, 1X, 2X rate, IFAS rate of nutrients, primarily manganese and zinc. In this case, both as either sulfates or phosphites. And we followed the nutrient levels for this through different through this 5-year period. And so these are the IFAS recommended rates found in those publications that have not changed yet, but we're in the process of changing them. So that if you are looking at foliar rates down at the bottom of that table for manganese and zinc, it's typically 3 to 5 pounds of metallic per acre per year applied to the leaves. So we're using that as a multiple during the study. What we found was that that we could overshoot the optimum range by applying the larger amounts of micronutrients as you would expect, and that's what that higher dotted line is that we would overshoot the optimum range for that particular nutrient. Then it would tend to come back down again as those nutrients were utilized within the leaf itself. So we looked at different types of nutrients. In this case, it was manganese as a sulfate or a phosphite, and you can see that there's slight differences between the two, but sulfates are much cheaper than the phosphite form, and so that's still the recommendation is utilizing sulfate forms of the micronutrients as a foliar spray. So the results of what we found was that in both manganese and zinc was that the highest rate of yield was found with the 1.5 application or 3x application per year. That gave us the highest yield. It tended to drop off with the 6x application. And what happened there is that we were actually providing too much nutrients. We were putting more leaves on the trees and less fruit. So that you have to take that into consideration. If you're trying to rebuild your tree, if the tree is declined, you have a very thin canopy, you want to take a year or so to rebuild the canopy, get the density of the leaves back up, then you want to apply higher nutrients. We didn't see nutrient burn on the leaves. We just saw more leaves, less fruit. If you want to maintain the optimum amount of fruit that you can produce, you want to back it off to a 3x application. And that will be our new recommendation. It's a three times that 5 pounds of metallic per acre. This is looking at the leaf zinc and manganese concentrations. This is a second study that we've done. I mentioned we did a 5-year study. We're repeating that with a 3-year study. This is the second second study. In this case, we're combining both foliar and soil application. We have a foliar only application. We have a foliar plus a 1x soil application and a foliar and a 2x soil application. And in that case, we found that again the 2x application was the best concentration. But it was the combination of foliar and one application of soil nutrients that gave us the best results. You don't have to go to 2 applications of soil. The 1 application is sufficient. This is looking at leaf concentrations, and the 3x you'll see is well over the optimum range, and again would provide a method of rebuilding trees, but not give you optimum yield. So the 2x application will do that sufficiently. An interesting thing with this graph, the one on your right, is that we had Hurricane Irma come through during the study, knocked a lot of leaves off the trees. We wanted to see if it also affected the concentration of nutrients in the tree, and as you can see, it did. It brought the leaf concentrations of nutrients down below the optimum range. So environmental factors play into this greatly. Canopy volume, as I mentioned before, the 2x application, the foliar and the soil application is the best combination, provides the best canopy volume. It also provides the most leaf area, although the 1x and the 2x are similar. The 3x is maybe a little less. We also looked at calcium and magnesium and a combination of calcium and magnesium. One thing we were able to determine from field leaf samples was that calcium was greatly affected by HLB. We had a reduction in calcium content. And so we wanted to see if it was required to provide both calcium and magnesium, or maybe a combination of the two. And the combination of the two was no better than calcium by itself. The magnesium actually did best as far as canopy volume. Then, so this brings us to the what I mentioned previously, and this is my final slide from those production guides, is that we've gone to a system of screenhouses, basically growing full-grown adult mature citrus trees under screen, very small pore size or opening size in the screen, so we can exclude the psyllids from those trees. What we've also found, and I don't have the details here, but what we have found is that you can also use this system to provide very detailed, very precise fertilizer applications to those trees, and that they will benefit both in tree size and tree yield, and also in the time that they mature, or they go into full production. Typically, with the improved practices, field operations of HLB affected trees, we're typically into full production by years 3 to 5. Under canopy, it could be as soon as 2 years, and we'll be in full production. So those trees respond very, very well to the screened houses. They're expensive to put up, of course, but if you can you know have the upfront cost of the screen houses, you benefit in the long run because one, your trees produce earlier and they produce longer because they're not affected by the HLB, and HLB is what's limiting our tree life at this point. So to summarize, we have two official within University of Florida IFAS. We have two official guides. That's one that's produced with a large amount of detail every 10 years or so, and then the other one that's revised yearly. That's used for best management practices. Changes in the micronutrients for HLB affected trees, as well as possibly calcium and magnesium, are coming. It's working through our system at this moment. We have a system of reviewing research data in order to change our recommendations, and that's happening now. So we also have studies underway. That was a NIFA sponsored program that is looking at nitrogen and potassium rates. We're towards the end of that study now. We'll be analyzing the data and coming up with recommendations for those two nutrients. And then soil testing for phosphorus is a big issue in Florida. How it affects water quality. And so that's something we'll be looking at starting hopefully this summer. We've been able to obtain some money from the legislature to look at phosphorus in other crops this year, and we're trying to renew that contribution from the legislature this year, and that will also include citrus. So we'll have a 3 to 5 year study on phosphorus in citrus and how we need to perhaps change recommendations there as well. So be glad to answer any questions you may have. Yes. Well, it depends on if we can keep the hurricanes away. When Hurricane Irma came through, it severely damaged most of the houses. Some of them collapsed completely. So that's a downside. But barring hurricanes, we expect 5 years, maybe more. We really haven't had them in the ground. Yeah. They were, yes. Sorry, I failed to mention that pretty much 100% of trees over the age of 2 or 3. All of the data I showed you were fully infected trees. Yes. The question was referring to extractants and phosphorus specifically. The first part of the question is why are we looking at phosphorus? And we have to. I mean, we in the normal course of things, it was we felt that micronutrients and the secondary macronutrients were most beneficial in improving tree health. So we've lagged behind in the macronutrients. in P and K. So we're catching up with that. As far as why we're doing it now, and we haven't done any of it yet. We haven't done anything with phosphorus yet. We're working on nitrogen and potassium right now. It is a political issue with BMPs and something that we have to address, but something we need to address. And we've been waiting for a funding source to be able to do that in a large scale. And so we will be starting this summer. As far as the what you mentioned about Mehlich 3, typically not providing or not allowing fertilizer applications under BMP recommendations, that's true. It's very true. When University of Florida went from Mehlich 1 to Mehlich 3 about 5 years ago, we made a simple comparison of these are the typical, for the same soil samples, this is what we received. This is what we got from Mehlich 3. This is what we got from Mehlich 1. We did a simple regression and said, okay, here's what the Mehlich 3 numbers should be. Unfortunately, that's not the way it should have been done. But that was done as a measure of expediency to get that out there. And it was done primarily in Florida because of high pH. Mehlich 3 is much more effective at high soil pH than Mehlich 1. So what we're doing is this funding source from the legislature I mentioned is for recalibration of Mehlich 3. We're doing it right now for tomato and potato, two very important crops in Florida. So we'll have new Mehlich 3 recommendations for those two crops that will hopefully provide much better recommendations. And then we'll be doing that for citrus as well.